Well, hello and welcome to the Pumpjack Pro Sample Application webcast. My name is Dave McCormick. I'm VP of Product Management here at Alpha Software. And today I'm going to be going over the Pumpjack Pro Sample Application. Actually, we're going to be deconstructing it. So let me go ahead and share my screen, and I'll show you what I'm talking about here. So the Pumpjack Pro is a sample application, like I've mentioned before. It's been around for about a year, and partners have actually used it as a foundation for building their own applications. So I think it's actually a pretty solid learning example. What I like in particular about it is that it has a whole bunch of great alpha features built into it. For example, it uses the FormView Control and custom editors, GPS location, photo capture, list controls, panel cards. There's panel navigation, panel navigators, client-side templating. There's overlay windows. There's action JavaScript and a signature capture control. So there's a whole bunch of really kind of neat components that have been put together into this application. And so it's a good thing to pull apart if you want to see how any of these actually work together. So to start with, what is Pumpjack Pro? Well, Pumpjack Pro is an offline capable application, so this will run offline and store data offline, that allows users to keep track of information about pump jacks, which are, those pieces of machinery. You might see them out in Texas. Kind of look like horses' heads bobbing up and down, pulling oil and gas out of the ground. And this application is meant to keep track of the condition that they're in. So you'll have a location and whether or not the machinery is working, whether or not the bolts are tight, and things like that. And I'll show you how that works as we go along. So the first thing, let me just move. So let's just go through the features and sort of show you what we built out. I know I've mentioned the components just a moment ago, but let me show you what the actual features are. For one thing, it lets you capture GPS location. So when you click this button here, it fills in the latitude and the longitude where you are, where the camera is. There's also a button that takes pictures. So when you click this button, you can take a photograph with the phone, and it displays the picture here. It keeps it in memory in the phone so that it can be uploaded as part of the record. Another thing it has is a data-driven menu. So this is neat because chances are you don't need a Pumpjack Pro application yourself, but if you wanted to change this around for your own needs, this menu here is actually not individual things in which I've entered in a picture and a heading and so on, but it's rather a list control. So it's all controlled by data. You make changes to the data, and it will change the menu. There are some simpler things as well, navigation buttons. Also, we built a sort of a special kind of toggle button for pass-fail fields, which is just much easier to hit with your thumb than using the keyboard that's built into a mobile device. Again, the questions themselves are data-driven, so you can edit a database essentially to change the questions to your questions. We have this little pop-up overlay, so think of this as like a help screen. In this case, if you want to know how tight each of the nuts or bolts are supposed to be, here are their torque ratings based on their size. So that's just a fun little pop-up thing here. There's also a gauge, which lets you know whether or not a value is within a range. So battery voltage, if it's below 11, let's say, it's going to point to the left. If it's above 13, it's going to point to the right. If it's around 12, it's going to point straight up and down. We have the same here for the engine speed in RPM. And then one of my favorite controls is the signature capture control. So at the end of the inspection, you could sign your name, click a button, and submit it. And that could, send off an email. It could trigger some sort of workflow or start some sort of process going. So let's see how it was built. So one thing I want to let you know right away is that this sample application and others are available to you on our public GitHub account. So I would like to start there and show you what we've got. If you go to github.com/alphaanywhere, and you can do this at the end of the webcast, you will find about 18 projects that we have, and we're adding more all the time. What you want to do once you get here is you want to click the repositories button, and the repositories button will show you all of the projects. The one that we're going to choose is called Pumpjack Pro V2. There are two Pumpjack Pros, but choose the version 2 of it because it has a lot more cool features in it. And this project, like the other ones, has a README file, which we've documented how you get this from the GitHub website down to your computer so you can play with it in Alpha Anywhere. Each project can be a little bit different. Sometimes we just give you a web component. Sometimes we'll give you the web projects folder. And in this case, we've given you the entire workspace. So to install this kind of project, basically you're just going to click the Clone or Download button, choose Download Zip, and you're going to download and unzip it onto your hard drive. Once it's unzipped, you're going to go find the pumpjackpro.adb file and double-click on that, and that will open it up in Alpha Anywhere. Now, we're taking a look now at the Web Projects Control panel, and this is where you kind of organize your work. Now, I'm not going to go into a great deal of detail about the Web Projects Control panel or about some of the other concepts in Alpha Anywhere. I'm going to assume for this webinar that you know a little bit about how to work in Alpha. So the deconstruction portion is just to sort of lift your knowledge up a bit there. But we do have a really good 1 hour overview. It's basically how to build an app in an hour. We produced it recently within the last couple of weeks. And it's with Dean McCormick, and he does, no relation by the way, and he does an excellent job of bringing it through. So let's just go through, excuse me for a moment, and we're going to open this up, this one UX control panel. Actually, let me back up and show you what we've got. We have this thing called Pumpjack Pro V2, that's a UX control, and we're going to open up our UX builder. And this is what goes into the Pumpjack Pro application, all of this stuff here in the middle. So we're going to go over to Working Preview, and in Working Preview, you're going to see what the application looks like in the simulator. Now, in the simulator, in the application, the first button we have, which I showed you, was the Capture Location with GPS. So let's start there, and I'm going to show you how we built that one. First of all, we went over to the button for the GPS capture. And if you'll take a look here in the properties, we have a couple things that we've set on that button. So after we brought the button over from the other controls section into our outline here, first we use a marker image, and we have a button class. And if I can go back up, I'll show you what that does. Click, click, click. So the class gives it its shape. We've told it I want it to be green. I mean, this may not be your style, but you can just change the button class to however you like. And this is the marker image that I put in. You might also consider using SVG fonts or something else like that for your buttons. Now, that's styled the button, but how do we actually make it work? So if we double click on it to open up its on-click event, it'll bring us here to this editor. And here you have the ability to either write some JavaScript, if you want to do JavaScript from hand, or you could use Action JavaScript, which is a huge feature in Alpha Anywhere. It will save you tons and tons of time. So the Action JavaScript is sort of a wizard approach to building JavaScript actions that you want to occur either when you press a button or when some other event occurs. You have a whole collection of JavaScript actions. In this case, we're choosing the geolocation function. And when I choose the geolocation function, like I said, it's wizard driven, so a wizard appears and it asks some questions about how I would like it to be set up. Well, the first thing I want to do with the geolocation function is tell it that I want to take the data that I've retrieved from the phone about its GPS location. I want it to fill in some fields. Then next to it, I have or just below it, this is sort of the field mapping. In other words, I want to take the latitude from the GPS unit and fill it into a field called latitude on my UX component. And I map that by clicking on this button here. So I've taken latitude, which comes with that control, and I've mapped it to the latitude control on my UX. I've done longitude, the same thing. But notice here that there are a bunch of other settings that you could also use, which I think are kind of cool. You could know the speed that the camera was traveling at the time, or the altitude, or which direction you were going. Stuff that we don't actually need for this application, but that is there should you need it in your application. All right, moving right along. Now we'll take a look at the camera control. And with this, when you press the button, it fills in this image here, and it saves it to a list control. And let me go ahead and show you how we did that one. So again, we've defined a button, and this time we've given it a different picture. It's not the map marker picture, but the camera picture. We've used the same class, although we've changed the size a bit to make it taller so that it fit into our design. And then for its action JavaScript, we chose an action called image capture. So this is all predefined. You just fill out the wizard, and let me show you the wizard for that one. So here is the wizard for the image capture action JavaScript action. The first thing you'll find, usually the first thing I said isn't the first line, but the second one where it says image capture method. And it talks up here a little bit about what the two choices are. You can either choose between PhoneGap or HTML, or third choice is PhoneGap preferred, meaning if PhoneGap is available, use that, but otherwise you can fall back to HTML5 as the method. So what's the difference between these two? Well, with PhoneGap, which only works if you're publishing this wrapped in a PhoneGap shell. Again, we're not going to get into that today, but if you're doing it that way, it makes a little bit of a smoother experience, because when you press the button, it'll open up the camera. It'll just go straight to the camera, and you'll be ready to take a picture. If you use the HTML5 method, what it does is it opens up the dialog box which asks you, do you want to use the camera, or do you want to take an image from your camera roll? Now, if you know you're never going to be taking images from the camera roll, that's always going to be an extra step. And if you're going to do something repeatedly in an application, you want to avoid doing extra steps. So I tend to set this to PhoneGap preferred. Now let's think back for a minute to the GPS location example I just gave you. Back there was a field map. So when the device captured the latitude and the longitude, it automatically stuck it into these two fields for us, the latitude and longitude field. Now there isn't one of those on the image capture control. Instead, you have to write a really tiny bit of JavaScript to take the image from the camera and actually put it into your UX control. And you do that here where it says JavaScript to execute when image has been captured. And let me show you the JavaScript behind it. It is one line. Dialog object, set value, picture. Picture is the name of the UX control in the dialog, and eData is the data itself coming from the camera. Now, you'll know this value because you've created the field yourself, and eData, the data coming from the camera, if you forgot what that parameter was, it's actually listed up here in the help notes. But this part is something you probably aren't going to remember off the top of your head until you type it in a few times. Dialog, object, set value, whatever. When we know that, we actually have a way of making that easier for you. Right here where it says Insert UX Component Method, if you click on that, it gives you a list of all of the methods. Here I filtered it by typing in something into the filter box to only show you things that match SETVA, because I know set value is somewhere in the name of it. And I'm going to grab this one here, and this and it explains what it does, but basically it sets the value of a control to some amount of data. And that's really all there is to it. So when you click the button, that little snippet of JavaScript fires, and the image is captured to the field. The next thing I want to go over is the menu. Now, the menu, like I said before, is a data-driven menu. It's actually created when the application is run, and it's doing it using data that comes from a list of basically of fields and icons. I'll show you what I mean by that. So to begin with, this is a list control. A list control takes data from a data source and it merges it with a template, an HTML template, and it creates a list. In this case, a list of menu choices. Here's the data that we're using. The data is the icon, the name, and the layout name. So basically, I have icons for each one of my menu choices. I have a heading for each one that I'd like it to appear in the menu. And then I have this last piece of data here, which tells Alpha Anywhere where it should go once I click on a particular item in the list. So here's the icon, there's the name, and when I click on this button, it shows you where it should go. So to do that, I showed you the data, but let me show you the template. This is just some HTML. You'll see here's the icon right there. Over here where my mouse pointer is. Here's the name. And what you don't see is the the field, the layout name field, the one that takes you to a particular layout, because I'll show you where we do that, and that's over here on the on-click button. So if you think about it, this here is really, it's just a list. It's only meant to display data, but it does have the ability to do something when you click on it. And in this case, what we want it to do is we want it to do to move to another panel, and we want it to open up the layout that we clicked on. And so to do that, we had to write a little bit of JavaScript, and I'll show you how that was. All right, so this is the JavaScript here. It's a couple of lines. This is probably the most advanced JavaScript we're going to get in today, so don't worry too much about that. And I'm actually going to break it down for you. So if you want to steal my JavaScript, I'll show you how it works. To begin with, when you click on the object, it returns something called this value. That is basically which item did the user click on. And if that value is equal to sign, which is one of the pieces of data in our data, we're going to tell it to go to the signature panel. The signature panel is a little bit different than the other panels. It's different than the prime mover panel and the guideline panel and the other ones. So this is sort of an exception one up here. But otherwise, if you've clicked on one of the other ones, it's going to do the following three things. It's going to open up a FormView Control, and I'll get into that in a minute, what a FormView Control is. It's going to choose the right layout in the FormView Control, and it's going to set the icon and the header up at the top of the screen, sort of in the control bar area, so that you know that you're in the right area. And that's it. Those are the three things it does. So I just said I was going to mention the FormView Control, and well, here it is. The FormView Control, you could sort of think of like the list control in the fact that it can take data and have it appear in with a template, but it itself doesn't store data. Instead, it relies on a list control to store data. And I will tell you about the list almost at the very end of the presentation, sort of the last thing that we get into. But I want to show you the FormView Control, because this is probably one of the more tricky controls for people, especially when they're new. And I don't think in the time allotted I'll be able to cover, in fact, I know I won't be able to cover everything you should possibly know about the FormView Control. But I'm going to show you the features of the FormView Control that we needed to get this particular application built. So to begin with, the FormView can have multiple layouts. Unlike the list control, where you set a template and it just follows that template for the whole thing, FormView Control can have different sets of templates. And this one here, and so here I've got one called structure, one called prime mover, one called gear reducer, and one called guideline. And these correspond to the menu choices from the menu that was in the list control. Now, for the template, I think that's what we're getting into next. Yeah, for the template, again, it's just some HTML, and here I put in the field labels, you know what field you're on. And here are those pass-fail buttons. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on how I built those. You can take a look at that for yourself. It does use some client-side templating here that I'm going to show you a little bit about these if statements a little bit later on, so you will learn about that. But just know that this, when you mix it with data, is going to produce basically something that looks like that. So in other words, that template plus the data that was entered into the list control will basically create this here. Now, just a quick review as to what we talked about. When we were back on the list control and you clicked on a particular menu item, remember it fired off some JavaScript. And the first thing it did is it set the heading text and it set the icon. And then it chose the correct layout. So this one to me, counterweights one, flywheel, this looks like it's part of the structure, right? Of course, part of the structure set of choices. And each one of these questions, like I said, is generated by moving data into a template, just like you saw. Now, the template that I showed you worked fine for most of the questions. You'll see question 4 and question 5. The only thing that's really different about them is that they've got text. But let's take a look at item 6 here, and that is similar in that it has a pass-fail button, but it also has this other button, this See Torque Chart. What this is meant to do is when you click on it, like I showed you before, it pops up this overlay window. So the question is, how do we make, if you're using a template, how do you make an exception And it turns out it's really easy. When you're in a particular layout, you choose your layout here, you could choose a particular question in your layout and give it a different template, which is what I've done. And so my template here was basically on top of those pass-fail buttons down here at the bottom. On top of the field label, which is right in the middle, I've placed this torque chart. And the torque chart, I don't know if I'm going to go into what an A5 item is, but I will in a moment, is a button that when you click on it, an action occurs. Oh, good. Actually, I'm going to do that. Okay. And so the action happens using this A5 item thing. You could think of A5 item as an on-click event, except the FormView control doesn't use on-click events. Instead, it uses these things called A5 items. So the reason for that is that you can reuse the same A5 item in multiple controls, and that actually ends up saving a lot of space and a lot of processing power on the phone. So when you only have 5 or 10 questions, it's no big deal. But when you get to a form which has got hundreds of controls on it, which is entirely possible for some of these inspections forms that we've been looking at recently from our partners and clients, it can actually crash the phone. So this is basically, it does a lot of sort of hardcore coding in the background. So instead of using an on-click event, you use an item, but then the properties still apply. So the item that we had was called show torque chart, and the show torque chart has an on-click event. And basically, the on-click event is just show this container window. Now, this is the JavaScript method. You can absolutely do that with Action JavaScript. You don't have to know how to program that. You could just click the Action JavaScript method and find the container window thing and tell it that you want to open window number 4. So what the heck is window number 4 anyway? Well, let me show you that. Window number 4 contains a picture of the wrench. It has the chart, the torque chart, and it has a close button at the end. Now, if you're not familiar with windows, windows are controls or groupings of controls that you do not see normally when you open up the application. You only see them when you call a piece of JavaScript to make them appear, usually on top of another screen. So this is basically a whole layout that just appears on top. Okay, so in that example, we had the image, and we had the title, and then we had this text here. Let me just show you how we did the text. It was just, basically, this is just pure HTML, is all it is, just a straight HTML, static HTML to build out this chart. But of course, you know, we could have used dynamic HTML as well. We could have pulled that data from some sort of data source, but we didn't need to in this case. Also on the screen, you'll see a close button, and the close button, as you can imagine, closes the window, not surprisingly. And the action JavaScript for that is simply called hide close container window. Again, another one of those action JavaScript things, so you don't have to write JavaScript yourself. All right, let's move on to the gauge. The gauge is kind of fun, and the gauge uses some client-side templating, and I want to show you how that's done. Basically, for 2 of the questions, prime battery and prime RPM, we've created special templates for them so that we could add in that gauge control. And the gauge control is, again, this is similar to the other ones you're looking at. The field label is up here at the top, and we have some styling, HTML, but we have some client-side templating in here. You can't really see it that well here, but I've given you a better picture right here. And this is client-side templating. It's pretty simple, straightforward stuff. We basically said if field name, in this case, what is the field that we are looking at, is greater than 13. You'd think it would be field value, but it's field name. Trust me on this. You'll see when you get into the code. Is greater than 13. I want you to show me this image. It's called gauge high. If it's between 11 and 13, show me the OK gauge, and if it's below 11, show me the low one. And it does that just by inserting images. Notice my crazy spelling. That's how it is in the application too, so don't be too confused. But if it's so all it does is it just swaps in different pictures. Very, very simple and straightforward way of handling that. We also do have client-side charting and more sophisticated ways of handling this. When you modify the application, you might decide to use one of those, but this is the one that I've used. And then the last thing I want to show off here is the signature capture control. And the signature capture control is actually pretty easy to insert. Basically, it is just a control that you pull from data controls, and you format it over here. I've chosen the height and the width. You could choose the area in which the signature actually occurs, so the box can be a little bit bigger than the sensitive part where you actually write. You could choose the background color. Here we've chosen a gray. You could choose the color of ink that appears on it. And that's all there is to it. The only other thing that appears here on that screen is this submit button. And the signature control works a little bit differently than other types of data controls like regular fields, in that you typically have a button that says, okay, what I've just signed, I'm now done with. Go ahead and save it to my list controller, to my data source. So you need to have a button which does that, or some other type of event that does that. You could certainly do it, when you leave the panel or any other event. But let me show you the JavaScript that's behind that. Basically, it is this one. Dialog object functions save canvas, and then the name of my signature capture control. So that's a nice piece of code you're probably going to need if you decide to use the signature capture control. So just keep an eye out for that. And then the last thing I want to talk about is the list control, which basically keeps track of all of the data. So up until now, you're probably saying, okay, this is great. I'm capturing latitude and longitude and the name of the site and a picture of the site and whether or not something was inspected or not inspected, but where's it all being stored? And the answer is we've placed it into, oops, where did I go? We placed it into a list control. And this list control is hidden, so you don't actually see it, but it hangs out in the background. And let me just show you what's in it. It's just a whole series of static data in this case. So it has basically each one of the field names in it, and all the way through. So we've done this. This is a flat file sort of situation. There's no reason you couldn't have used a couple of list controls though, if you decided that you needed to use a relational type of setup. Like for example, if you saw something that was repeating. Let's say it was like, bolt 1, bolt 2, bolt 3, bolt 4, bolt 5, and you didn't know how many bolts you had to check. That would be the time to use probably a second list control. In this particular example, flat was good enough. So what's next? Well, here are some things that you can do with the project when you are done or when you download it. You might think about hooking up, first of all, the list control I just showed you to your own data source. Maybe a SQL data source, or maybe hook it up to a web service to exchange that data. You might also, in fact, this would be a great idea, is unhide that list where all the data is, so that you could take a look at all of the inspections you just performed. It could also show you which ones have been synchronized with the backend database, because the list control has the ability to do that. And lastly, and also, you probably want to change up the icons and the questions and things like that, and that all occurs in the data, which I showed you how to do that. You probably want to hook up that submit button on the signature page to kick off some sort of workflow. Like you could have it send an email, or you could have it make an API call, or commit the data to your system of record. And the other thing that you probably want to do, because this is, like I said, this app is about a year old, is back then we didn't have the new control bar control. You probably want to use that in your application as opposed to the method we were doing, which was just like a header up at the top. Could give a neater appearance. You might add a menu in, which lets you maybe jump from one section to another, or give you some other functionality, like just tell me which questions have yet to be filled in. You might want to put some other error checking things on. You may want to add your own custom controls as well beyond just those the gauges and so on, and the pass-fail buttons. So that is pretty much it. I think I've gone through this in looks like about half an hour or so. And I'm ready to take some questions if you have questions about this application. If you don't have any questions, or you only think of your questions later on, go ahead and send them to guides, G-U-I-D-E-S, at alphasoftware.com. We do monitor that, and we will get right back to you with answers. So I'll give you a couple of minutes to type in questions. I don't see any right now. And if not, we will sign off. So I'm seeing half a question, but it looks like the other half of it will read, how much time is required, to build out an application like this? If you're an experienced developer, you could probably bang out an app like that in about, I don't know, a day, maybe, or an afternoon if you're quick. Part of it will be just deciding what the look and feel is going to be like. That can take a little while, but the actual coding is really quite straightforward. And as with most applications, a great deal of the time is actually figuring out what it is exactly you can, or rather should be building based on client requirements. So someone said for a MySQL database, what would be the data type for a picture? And the ink and signature control, I believe for ink and signature you can do long character, and for MySQL it's whatever the equivalent of a blob field is. I don't recall exactly for that one, but I can get you the answer if you want to send it an email. How long would it take to build this with traditional tools? Well, it would, it would take an awful long time. It would. I can't even imagine. It would probably be a month or something like that. I mean, if you were starting from scratch. The reason is that we have saved you tons of time with a lot of these pre-built controls, such as the signature capture control, and the FormView control, and the listbox control, and all the integration work that we've done for the plugins, for taking pictures, and for GPS. So it would take a substantial amount of time. You're probably looking at like a 30-to-1 time saving by using a low-code tool like Alpha. And so, yeah, like I said, probably someone else is asking, like, how much faster than other things. Well, customers have come back to us and said, 10 times faster, 30 times faster, something like that. So I see someone had their hand up. If you want to just type your question, type it into the questions box of the GoToWebinar control panel, and I'd be happy to answer it. And if not, we can break. Well, that looks like it. I want to thank everyone who is here today. Thanks for asking your questions. Thanks for watching. Again, if you have any further questions about this, go ahead and send an email to guides@alphasoftware.com. Be happy to answer it. And please go grab this from github.com/alphaanywhere. It's the Pumpjack Pro version 2 project. Thanks again. Take care, and I hope to see you at a future webinar. Bye-bye.